welcome everybody to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. The East is a podcast, Psychic Militancy, Adnan Hussein show. We need to come up. Yeah, it's Tanky's not in therapy, I guess, right now. Anyways, good to see both of you, Adnan and Lara. Sina should be joining us soon. He's helping out with a family member right now, but should be on his way soon. Yeah, so I'll just start. I mean, one, it's always great to be in conversation with both of you as well as Sina. I mean, I think as long as this war is going on, that it will be important for us to continue to have conversations. Adnan, you've been everywhere. Shout out to you. Also, people check out Resistance is Fertile. You did another thing with Benji and Indica last night, and there's just so much to talk about, obviously. And one of the things I do want to make sure that people do as they tune in is that they find media sources that are giving them different perspectives than what they're going to find within so much of the media that's out there. So anyway, just wanted to start with that. But maybe Adnan, you could talk a little bit about some of the conversations that you have been having in the last few days, just to give people kind of a overview of some of the things that you're looking at and have been talking about and digging into with people.
I really appreciate you organizing this session, Jay, Lara, for being here, and hopefully we'll see Sina and just the community of solidarity and support for comrades, and providing analysis, sharing insights, links to things. I mean, there's been a really fertile collaboration that's taking place, that the crisis since the genocide, and now with it being ramped up into regional war more fully and directly, and the stakes that are global. I mean, I would say things on shows for the last 2.5 years that Palestine is an issue for humanity in the world, and that the fate of the world was resting on it. Sometimes it might have been hard to get people to see exactly how it was global rather than something, local. But now I think, all of those lines and the connections, which is something that I always have been emphasizing, and on the recent podcasts or streams that I've been doing, is the connection between Palestine and Iran. This war is part of the same war, on the Palestinian people. It's conducted by the same groups, and it's against the same people who are resisting. And that should be very, very clear for everyone, that the principal reason why, apart from the general point of, any sovereign nation trying to follow its own path for its society to achieve its goals, outside of the Epstein Empire, is going to face severe sanction, subversion, terrorism, ultimately even war, attack, and genocide. But there's something particular and unique about Iran's position in this, is because they are the only sovereign country in the entire region, and what they've done with their sovereignty is express solidarity and a global vision of anti-imperialism against the Zionist entity, and for Palestinian freedom, because they recognize and understand that it's for the entire region, and that the whole region will never be free unless they decolonize and liberate from Palestine to Central Asia. This region of West Asia will always be under imperialist attack and hegemony. It'll be under hegemony, and it'll be under attack whenever they resist it, until they manage to defeat the empire in Palestine, and so that's why they are being subjected to this. So that one connection from a regional perspective, and why it's a regional war, is something that we've been talking a lot about. The second kind of main, I would say, theme that has emerged is how the Iranian people, because of their religious faith, their culture, their revolution, these are not things that are just trans-historical, I want to say. It's not like because of just the theology, it's because of the history and the revolutionary history that they have, that their faith that they have maintained and preserved in this and integrated into their revolutionary anti-imperialist perspective has given them a possibility to deal with these losses in the same way. It's the same thing that we've seen and wondered for 2.5 years how the people of Palestine could persevere in the face of the onslaught of what they're facing genocide, that nonetheless they hold firm. Why? How can they do that? Well, one of the things that they rely upon is how they understand, their faith. And so we've seen the grief, the mourning that is so different from how you would imagine it. Is that the grief should, make you, feel apolitical and want to just like curl up into a ball of suffering? No, instead they use tazia, grief, for anti-colonial defiance. You've seen these people flooding into the streets, into squares, despite bombardment happening over their heads. The missiles coming, bombs, coming over their heads in their city, but they are flooding in the millions all across the country into their city squares to express their defiance. And my friend David Yagubian, who was on the stream last night, said that in the square close to where his his auntie lives, and we visited her, went over to her house. Her back window had been shattered by the bombardments in June. So in the Van Nack area, kind of middle classy sort of area in the somewhat central northern part of Tehran, that they were chanting Marber Istikbar, okay, death to arrogance. And that's what we've seen, is the arrogance of these racist, Islamophobic Orientalists, white supremacists, has led them to diminish and depreciate not only the worth and value of other people's human lives, but also to imagine that they could do so with impunity, that they would get away with it. And this is what Iran is teaching them. Nobody is going to get away with it. Now we've watched 2.5 years of genocide. We've watched 40 years of suppression, intervention, invasion, sanctions on this region. There's a cost to be paid for that. And now that is being collected in the resistance of an all-out regional war of anti-colonial liberation. So those are, I characterize it very much as the fall of Acre. This could be where the last of the crusader states in 1291, is kicked out of the region, by the Mamluks. This time, maybe it will be led by the noble people of Iran who are waging this resistance. And I'd love to talk, because it's something I always get into, is talk about, the recent comments of Reza Shah Pahlavi and this delightful ploy where he fell for, the prank, but he ended up revealing exactly what this is all about when he was eager to see if Germany would commit, forces on the ground as part of what he called the crusade. And so, that's something that I would love to talk a little bit more, especially since we've also learned that, with another theme that we talked about in our Tanky group therapy, and that I mentioned in the last couple of live streams that I've had with, the Resistance is Fertile crew and David Yagubian, is some of this apocalyptic religious kind of ideology and contrasting. It's not that Shiism isn't also kind of apocalyptic, like they're waiting, like the Imam, but instead of it being for like, let's be supremacist and suppress every, others to aggrand ourselves. It's let's liberate in this spirit of, really radical revolutionary generosity. They have made sacrifices, and now they're committing themselves to really ultimate sacrifice, for the sake of their own sovereignty, but sovereignty, of the region, and how much that contrasts with the Jewish apocalypticism, the evangelical Christians in the military. It's come out, that they were told this is God's divine plan, and that, we need to trigger a war of Gog and Magog and Armageddon for the second coming of Jesus. And so, that's worth kind of really thinking about, like how sovereign these people are. They're driving a lot of these decisions. And I guess the last kind of general area that we've been talking about, because I don't know much, I try and keep up. There's so much information, what's happening in Lebanon, the strikes in the Gulf, and it's so hard for me to kind of figure out what's going on. All I know is Iran is still there and still fighting, and that means that they're winning, because they're supposed to collapse in either some kind of regime change or not be able to fight back, and they continue to do so. But there's the Gulf countries and the wider comprador vassal states. I'll really be interested to hear your thoughts on it, and especially I know Lara has a lot of contacts and people that she speaks to and about that. But what is the prospects here for the game of trying to either recruit them into the kind of crusader alliance as the colonial troops, right? They've used colonial troops, right, in their wars. So in World War I, World War II, the Western powers, colonial powers, used all these troops from their colonies, right? This is what they want to do, since they don't want to commit their own people on the ground. They'd love to be able to use, but I mean, I'm sorry, I don't think these Saudi fat cats are really a fearsome force that they could deploy, so but in any case, what they want to do is at least turn them into having to be very directly involved rather than passively doing things and support stuff. They want them to come out much more direct way, or whether they are going to realize and feel this is a very dangerous situation where we are being exposed. All of our illusions are gone. The fantasies that we could create a kind of quasi-Israel mini, little garden, in the jungle of the Middle East, with these surrounded by these barbarians. We could have peace and security and material benefits and all of that predicated on, sacrificing our sovereignty and being vassals to, the Epstein Empire. Well, now that didn't work. So, what are they going to do? Are they going to really understand that they face maybe revolutionary kind of forces and collapse in places like Bahrain? Maybe the Palestinians rise up in Jordan. I mean, all these regimes, are facing a kind of risky situation that could transform the whole situation. So those are some of the things that we've been kind of thinking about and talking about, and those are topics that I'd love to. Well, people are welcome to go and check out what we've already said, but I'm really interested in these topics and any ones that you all think are really important to try and think together and develop more understanding of those kind of key what seem to me key issues.
Thank you, Adnan. Yeah, Lara, what's coming up for you right now?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for doing this, Jay, and getting us together. And Adnan, yatik alf afi. During Ramadan, there are always programs that people follow. I think you're doing the Adnan Hussein part of that. You're our regular Ramadan programming. And it's a labor of love. I know it's a labor of political commitment, but just want to shout you out. Folks, make sure you follow Adnan's show and like it and do all the things. Hi, Sina.
Hi.
Good morning. So for me, what's coming up is I love that Adnan already put us into the realm of sovereignty, and to really just from the get-go say for empire, sovereignty is the threat, right? And this is, I think, also how we can connect what's happening in our region, in the Swana region more broadly, and certainly what is now, what is referred to as the Middle East, but also what the United States is doing in Cuba and Venezuela, right? I mean, our comrade Alex Avinia always talks about this, that anytime that Latin America tries to sort of assert its sovereignty, this is the sort of thing that the United States does. So in many ways, what it's doing in our region is not new to empire. Anytime a nation tries to say, I refuse to be under the boot of empire, there are all these things that are, brought out to crush it. And Iran is a bulwark in response. That it has not bent the knee. It has not actually caved to pressures. And this is why I love that Adnan kind of just started us out like that, about this idea of it being the only sovereign nation in the region. And I want to put a fine point on this, is every other nation that pretends it has sovereignty, it's a pretend sovereignty, because it's at the end of a barrel of a gun. And that gun is held by the United States and oftentimes shot by the Zionists, right? So that's what we kind of have to look at. So I'm thinking about Lebanon in this case, wants to sort of wax poetic about its fucking sovereignty. And just yesterday, we have a ground incursion into Lebanon where the president of Lebanon is said to have told the army to stand down and retreat 15 kilometers in. And the head of the army is sort of like, what do we do if these Zionists attack us? And the president is saying, you're not allowed to engage. That is not sovereignty, right? That is not a sovereign nation. Especially when you mobilize sort of anti-Hezbollah rhetoric under the guise of sovereignty, but then you have nothing to say and nothing to do around actual incursions into your sovereignty. But one of the things we were actually just talking about before we went live was, if it's really important for also us to track what nations are not being hit by Iran, right? Like Yemen's not being bombed by Iran. Okay, Oman, there's maybe a special thing going on there. But Yemen and Lebanon is not being bombed by Iran. And why? Because there is resistance there. Like, they're not going to bomb Hezbollah. They're not going to bomb, the Houthis. They're not going to bomb people who have made their position clear about where they stand in reference to US empire and the Zionist entity. So all these sorts of psychic inversions that are happening around what makes a nation safe or not, we've seen over and over again. I think we said this in Tanking Group Therapy, that it's US bases and it's US empire and the presence of US meddling that actually makes countries that are so-called sovereign, but they're not, because they're, I think this is what Sina was saying last time, is like they're blackmailed by United States empire. Apart from the fact of that they are a necro-capitalist class and a lot of them are monarchies and all these sorts of things, is that it actually makes them more vulnerable, right? It makes them more vulnerable from the inside, because by and large, the people on the ground are actually against US interventionism. And I really think that's really important, because there's a way in which we get this sort of image that, let's say, the GCC states, that everybody's sort of anti-Iran. I don't give a fuck what they actually think about Iran per se, but they hate the United States. They hate the United States because by and large, the majority is pro-Palestine. Palestine continues to be a central cause for most people across our region, right? Regardless of where their governments and their corrupt governments stand, that the people are pro-Palestine and have always been pro-Palestine, right? And so our liberation in the entire region, I don't think people have lost sight that our liberation runs through Al-Quds, that our liberation cannot be hand in hand with American machinations and empire, that those things are irreconcilable to the people on the ground. They also recognize, and if nothing else, what Iran has done in this past week is shown us that the United States doesn't even give a fuck, even when it has bases there, right? So the Saudi sort of, what's it called, press release that comes out and goes, oh, the United States has turned its back on us and has just sent all its forces to protect the Zionist state. It's sort of, no shit, what the fuck did you think? So in many ways, one of the things Iran is doing is also forcing their hand. It's not allowing these states to engage in an allyship with empire under the guise of innocence. There is no more innocence. You pick a side, and when you pick a side, you understand what are the risks that come with that. And if you're picking a side and kind of sort of foregoing your responsibility to your people for empire, for capital, for the Zionist state, whatever the case may be, there is no more pretense about what happens when you have a base there. The United States for a long time has been able to ride this wave of saying and blackmailing people and saying, if we have a base there, you are actually more protected. It's clear to us, right? We know that the Gulf states are now saying that within a week, they will have no more defenses left against rockets. Within 2 or 3 months, they will have no fresh water. The entire system is set up to have them be dependent on United States empire. But even that is not cashing out. And I think that's the position for us to think about. I think that's the place also where we can intervene, right? If we are talking about people on the ground or a groundswell, or people psychologically staying themselves against this, or understanding the source of suffering always comes from empire, and particularly an empire that is singularly focused on propping up its baby settler state, right? Its own base in the region, that there's nothing but suffering that comes from that. And many of us would think we wish we had learned that lesson long ago, right? But the way that psychological warfare works, the way that global domination works, the way that blackmail works, the way that sanctions work, we know these sorts of promises of relief for people come to live inside of them and get internalized in a way that is really hard to shake, right? The United States is hard to shake. It's meant to intrude upon people's lives and interiority and make them think that there's a way out of this that doesn't involve dismantling empire and Zionism. But I think more and more, if there's anything we can do, is sort of hammer home that analysis, hammer home that knowledge that we have, that there is nothing good that can come from empire, from its force in our region. There's nothing savior about it. And those are the sort of internal seams that I think we can continue to push up against. If nothing else, making it certain that people know precisely the source of their suffering. It's not Iran, it's not the Hizb, it's not Yemen, it's none of these things. It's the United States and it's Zionism. And I think this is the sort of, like, that's our mantra. We have to just keep making sure that people understand this. And I think they do, but we also, the sort of, the other side of this is there's mass suffering that is happening. And I really want us to kind of hold that in mind too, that there are people in Iran that are suffering. There are people in Lebanon that are suffering. Yesterday, the Zionist state was just hitting random buildings right above the airport. It's a mixed area. There are Druze, there are all this, but the point is to foment hate against the Hizb. And also, there are so many displaced people that part of it is also to make people afraid to take in refugees from the South, right? And that's the type of suffering that I'm talking about. But if we can sort of continuously be committed to saying that suffering is created by condition, that condition is not new. That condition didn't start with Iran bombing, right? To the contrary, Iran has been actually quite circumspect for decades around this. And now we're starting to see, like Adnan was saying, is like there's a price to pay for impunity. And I think these last 2.5 years have been a level of impunity that's unthinkable, right? So that's where I'm at this morning.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That was great. Both of you, Adnan and Lara, such great, remarks to start us off with. Sina, how are you doing, buddy? When we posted this, I just have to say we got 2 responses, or maybe 3 now, of I am an Iranian. This is not an attack. This is a rescue mission.
This is a rescue mission. Yeah, this is like this is one of the talking points. This is not a war. This is a rescue mission.
Promise made, promise kept, #Trump. I mean, they were both like almost identical. It was like right out of the, probably Hindu bot farm that the Zionists are funding or whatever.
No,
but anyways,
it's weird, guys. I was listening to what you guys are talking about. It's kind of interesting to think. I wanted to run this by Adnan especially, but it has to do with all of us. I want to run by a phrase that's associated with something that Khomeini himself said. Khomeini said, the road to Jerusalem goes through Karbala. So I think Adnan, I think it's a really key expression to think about here, to like what this means. So just in the local context of when he said it, it had to do with this, like what Iranians called the sacred defense against this imposed war, which is to say that they call the Iran-Iraq war, which was actually like a global war against Iran, because Iraq was like a proxy of all of the major powers and the Gulf, and Iraq, and it was designed to bleed both countries. And it didn't turn out the way imperialists wanted to do. But I'm thinking now about that phrase and what it means, like not just like on the literal register, yes, but then there's the figurative register of like what Karbala is to Shia Muslims. So maybe Adnan, you should. Can I hear your interpretation? Because you're the Islamic scholar among all of us.
Well, I mean, but I mean, you've got it there. You know exactly what this is. But I'm so glad you mentioned though that the local context of it, of course, because he was also referring to the Iran-Iraq, the invasion, the Iraqi invasion, of Iran, and the 8 years of debilitating struggle. I mean, just think what people who fought for their sovereignty could have done, what direction this nation of Iran, where it could be, if it hadn't been sapped in all resources with hundreds of thousands of casualties, for 8 years. That, of course, restoring the access to the shrines in southern Iraq and bringing, freedom to, their people, comrades and people in Iraq, if they could get to Karbala, means that that they're stopping this war and uniting people and the region for the confrontation with the Zionist entity in the U.S. empire, of course, at the geopolitical level. But I think you're right to point out that it also meant, of course, the example of Imam Hussein. What happened in Karbala, of course, is the destruction, massacre of not just the martyr Imam Hussein, but his whole family, children, the women of the family, sisters, wife, daughters, and also close companions. It meant the destruction of a community that refused to bow to corrupt, illegitimate empire and rulership. Okay, so the narrative here, what we're dealing with right now, you can see why this is so, Trump is the Yazid, right? And, George Bush was the Yazid. And every American president, since Jimmy Carter for Iran has been the Yazid, because that has been the oppressors who were trying to make Iran give up its sovereignty and bow to illegitimate rule. That is, Yazid being the caliph or ruler of this dynasty, the Umayyad dynasty, that took over from companions and the family of the prophet, whom the Shia believed were rightful, legitimate religious and political figures of authority that would have led the Muslim community in a direction of justice and equality. And instead, it was perverted by these corrupt, Arab dynasts establishing kingdoms and taking the wealth for themselves and oppressing their own people, right? So Hussein, the grandson of the prophet, stands up against it and refuses to take an oath of loyalty. And for that, Yazid sent his forces and massacred these people in a tragic sort of way. And we've talked a little bit about the martyrdom of Hussein before, and the fact that subsequently, was it Imam Khomeini said, "We are the nation of Imam Hussein"? It might have been Khamenei, but I mean, one of the supreme leaders mentioned that we are the nation. So the road to Jerusalem comes only through adopting the revolutionary sacrifice of refusing to bow to empire. Like, this is a psychological. Lara, it would be great to hear, your kind of thoughts about this. That this is a psychological position that is absolutely necessary is that you must not be in the school of subservience. Lara, you sent me this wonderful video. I wish I could pull it up. I shared it on my story in Instagram, but you sent it to me. If we could show that, it is so amazing, because what it says is that, and this is how I understand what he means by Karbala, is it not just like narrowly Sheehi, kind of this is a history all Muslims should and must regard as a tragic event that happened. And the lesson is that you should not bow to corrupt rulership, and you must defend your dignity and sovereignty and those values. Is
and
that
I sent it because you had said that on the Tanki group therapy. That was part of what you were saying, right? Is that this is a larger ummah and this is not sectarian. And
that's right. Khomeini wasn't a narrow sectarian. I mean, when he talks about Karbala, he's talking about the meaning of that sacrifice, that martyrdom, because of standing for the cause of justice and refusing to bow to empire. And there was this great video you sent to me of, I think it might have been an Iraqi person who was traveling to Egypt and was detained, at the airport or whatever. And he was asked, "Oh, are you Shi'i?" And he said, "What are you talking about? This is like an old, question. There's no Shia Sunni. There's only two schools among us. There's the Madrasat al-Muqawama, of resistance, and there's the school or sect or orientation, the party of subservience, that, and we have Shia and Sunni and people who don't believe in any religion, and all different mix of people who are in the school of resistance, and we have all kinds of different of people, Sunni, Shia, blah blah, in the school of subservience. And now the battle is, are we going to accept humiliation and enslavement by the Zio-American empire, or are we going to stand up for dignity as honorable people who stand for justice and have some dignity? So this is a fight for the dignity of human dignity. And that's what I think Imam Khomeini meant, is that there's dignity in standing up for what you believe. You are never a loser. No matter what you sacrifice, you are never a loser if you stand up for dignity. You are always a winner. They may kill you, etc. And we've seen the wonderful video of Ayatollah Khamenei that actually Sina sent me. We should play that. These are amazing, these things where he said, "I have only the dignity that you've given to me, but I give it to all of you. I'm ready to sacrifice this debilitated, disabled body. I'm ready to do anything for you and, the revolution and Islam." Because as in another video that actually Benji sent me earlier this morning, is that he said also, if you love something, you will always have a loss. Like there's no way, no matter what you love, in the end, you will suffer a loss. And in a way, he's giving you the spiritual and the psychological and emotional preparation and the example that he then gives himself of being a martyr. He gives up everything. You loved Ayatollah Khamenei, you're going to lose him. But what you haven't lost is what he stood for, because he will always have that example. So that's the kind of thing that I think Khomeini must have meant, not just the geopolitical strategic thing. And it's only if we can tap into this feeling and this idea, the peoples of this region, but not just the peoples of the region. This is humanity. This is a culture of dignity, of life. If we can connect with that, then we can defeat this empire. And that's absolutely necessary for the defeat of the empire.
Yeah, thank you, Adnan. I'm going to see if I can play the video you're talking about real quick.
Jay, I'm sorry if you lose your channel if that happens for playing this video. Channel explodes live, your computer blows up. Actually,
Maybe I shouldn't.
well,
Go ahead.
Instagram is the worst. I don't think you could get in trouble for posting a video of Ali Khamenei. I don't think that would actually. I think you'll be safe. I think it's like if you posted maybe Qasem Soleimani stuff, maybe, but now that he's dead, they won't go after you. It's like
Well,
it's a
But
different
talk,
story.
talk about psychological operations. Here we are fucking just talking about descriptive things, something somebody has said, and we're having to sort of calculate, like, are we able to represent an actual statement that is said by an actual human? This is the fucking world we live in.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I was listening to Justin's sit rep from his day 3 sit rep, and in it he talked about how, you know, he and Nora had done an episode after the martyrdom of Abu Ubaida, you know, and you know, that it was taken down, and that they were sent notice that they were supporting terrorism by, you know, by having this conversation, you know. And I mean, this is the same thing. I know that they ended up rescinding the demonetization that they did for us, Lara, but it was similar. Like, we were just having a conversation about Hezbollah and, you know, Hassan Nasrallah, right? And like,
That was a
you know,
warning. They warned you with that. They said, okay,
Yeah,
you
no.
get one warning. Don't be too. Yeah. See, that's
Well,
funny.
I would say
I don't
the video-
monetize. I don't monetize. So I feel like that gives me a longer leash, because they're like, fine, fuck you. We'll take all your ad money. Keep giving us your labor for free. And I mean, I said this now watch them nuke my account. But
Yeah, I mean, we also
definitely
know,
have
like,
to do like a double check in your brain whenever you speak about this stuff. It's like, is this? I remember posting like pictures of Hassan Nasrallah's face on Instagram, and it just, you know, you can't. I mean, that's how afraid they are, which tells you something of like what the meaning of these figures are. And they use like the sort of the lawfare of terrorism and say, oh, you can't put a terrorist face, you can't say good things, or you can't, or what is it? Praising a dangerous organization. That's the way Patreon says it. Now, does Patreon enforce this stuff? I don't think so yet. I think if you are brazen about it,
all the American flags you want.
oh, of course. Well, that's obvious. But yeah, I mean, you know, I was thinking about this, like the fact that this is an uneven playing field, all of this makes us better. I honestly feel that. I know it's like a humanist argument, but like, you can't, the same, and strange to like, because in the sense of like, in the historical sense of like, let's say Iranian missile program, like their Iranian missile program was born of necessity because they couldn't buy it from the rest of the world. Right, like it was like the story is like almost like it's almost like something out of a novel. They got one extra scud from Gaddafi, who sold them like a handful, I think, or something, and then they begged him for one extra one, and then he gave it just kind of, oh, here you go, you little peasants. And like that initial team of RIGC dudes, like Air Force dudes. It was IRGC back then, but like this was like a nascent revolutionary country that had no ability to fight off a global invasion. So the story of the Iranian missile program is what is unfolding today. Like, this is a blossoming moment. I did an episode years ago now, called The Meaning of Missiles with a friend of mine, Arash, and he sort of told a little bit of the history of the background of this. Like Tehrani Moghadam is one of the guys' names. Is it Hassan? I always forget. Moghadam is his last name, Tehrani Moghadam, and he was like kind of the founding father of like the Iranian missile program. And he died in an accident, basically a kind of launch accident or work accident. I think like 2011. Israelis like tried to pretend it was their work, but it was actually just like a work accident. But I think at the end of the day, like this moment we're watching, how historic it is, that the U.S. empire's strategy, right, of the last, let's say, if you want to like bracket it off, we could say 91. You know, with 91 is a big moment in this. Why? I'm sure most of you know, it's Gulf War I. And that's the first time that like Americans are staged, I think, permanently in the region. I think it's Saudi Arabia opens the base there, I think, or something like that. Like that, that was like the birth pangs of a new Middle East moment. Because it was announcing the arrival of Uncle Sam. Like it had won the Cold War. Russia was shattered into pieces, and like the life expectancy had dropped probably 30 years or something. I think it was like in the 50s for a while for some men, which is like insane. And so like they were like, okay, we finished that one, on to the next one. And so the next one what they meant was Iran. And so this long-term strategy, like obviously with the beginning of Iraq first, and Saddam obviously gave them the excuse of destroying, and like it should give them the excuse of invading like Kuwait. And he did something that the Iranians are doing now, right? They're doing something that which is to say they're bucking American imperial power against that protects these Gulf regimes, right? Because without the American imperial power to protect them, these Gulf regimes have nothing. They have like a police force, basically, right? Like Bahrain is a imported monarchy, Sunni monarchy, against a huge majority of Shia people who are mostly downtrodden, mostly oppressed, and they use like Sunni cops and like all the like sectarian things that like Takfiri people say about Shia countries are actually true about Bahrain, way more. And these systems are protected by like Captain America's shield. But guess what's happening to that shield? Like it's getting lanced with like
Apparently,
a whole bunch of
there is no shield.
that's the thing. It turns out that when you break the rules and you open a Pandora's box, that the people who live in that region where you've moved trillions of dollars of hardware. I mean, this is trillions by now. Just the planes alone that they have there is probably in the trillions. It's probably over 1,000 billion, I think. It's probably over 1,000 billion, especially, I mean, maybe not the planes, but everything put together over the course of these like decades. And of course, those ships last a long time. The carriers last a long time. So it's not just like a one-time thing, but I would say that the amount of money and the whole historical sort of underpinnings of the military industrial complex are concentrated in the West Asian region. And what's happening? They are losing them one by one. They are being blinded. They are losing their command and control. The CIA isn't even safe in Riyadh. Okay, like that's something I tweeted out yesterday. It was that the idea of like that you can be a CIA agent, and Iranians not only know where your station is, they can find you and send a squadron of flying lawnmower shahids, right? Because that's what people call them. They're like cheap to make, and they're loud and they're lethal, but like people call them flying lawnmowers because they're not advanced tech. But the thing is, it turns out when you have intel and you're close by, you don't need advanced tech. You could just hit them with your suicide robots. So like if the CIA isn't safe in Riyadh, is any Saudi king actually safe? Like is any Saudi monarch, is any US general safe? Is anyone safe? Because that safety is the prerequisite for all of this. All the bullshit influencer campaigns, all the dirty wars, all the money laundering, all the pedophilia that takes place in the fucking Gulf, the slavery, like all of that is shielded by Uncle Sam, and that shield is gone. And I don't think we're really appreciating how much this means. Like we are living, what is the Lenin thing? Weeks and months, weeks and years and weeks. I can't remember. Decades and weeks and decades, something. You know what I mean? Like this is what it is. And this is the thing. Everyone was like, oh my God, why aren't you attacking? Why aren't you attacking? Iran was waiting for the maximum of forces to arrive to do the maximum amount of damage. So by attacking, and I probably feel, I'm beginning to feel like the martyrdom of Khamenei, Imam Khamenei, he was, that's like that it was intentional, that the guy knew that they would come for him.
Carefully orchestrated.
Yeah, carefully orchestrated. They said, okay, come get me. I'm right here. I'm just an old man. Come and take me. But my death will unleash something much bigger, because it will be a wake-up call. It will be a flag for all of my followers, which are numerous, right? So part of this moment is that both sides, like the evil side and the good side, like Yazid and the good guys, have the same basically set of not tactics, but I want to say like the same fundamental pillars, right? Like they have mechanical robot bombs called missiles that they throw at their enemy, hoping, and where they think is some way that they're going to get them someplace painful. And unlike, I mean, for us, for our side, we're launching them from, our own land. from their side, they have these big expensive planes and this big elaborate infrastructure to fly into neighboring countries, Iraq, Syria, and launch it from there. Or Iraq mostly now, I've heard. It's mostly doing from Iraq or the western edge of the country. But like this is, and they also have their own people who are showing solidarity with their side, who are like showing that, okay, we are a part of your side, right? So here in Toronto, you had a bunch of like brain rotted fascists who went and performed for the cameras after the assassination of Imam Khomeini. And that to me is like, okay, well, they have their side, like that's their side. But here's the difference. Like they need the machinations of the Western media to make them, let's say, relevant, right? Like if they didn't have every single social media site, every single news channel, every single major cable news network, if they didn't have those people on their side, you would never see any of this stuff. And so the astroturfing on their side is contrasted with like the love and the outpouring of grief and rage on our side. And so this is something that doesn't really compute in our analysis because this is something like they have to artificially do what they do, right? So what comes to Iran is natural. Defending Iran is natural. But like flying in and creating this elaborate network of countries who are your props for your money laundering exercises, but also an excuse to sell more military aid that you yourself, right, like own, and probably fly. Like, I don't think there's a Saudi Air Force. I don't think so. I think the Saudi Air Force are like Saudi dudes who sit in a lab and like they just sit in like a computer somewhere. I think it's an American British Air Force. And same with the Jordanians. Like why would you trust these guys with this hardware when they could fly away one day and take it? I don't think so. I don't know. I have no proof of that. I'm just speculating. But if I was a bloodthirsty imperialist goon, I would not let a bunch of fucking Saudis to fly these like important death machines because they could fly it right over our own bases maybe and like convince us. So I fully convinced that this is a massive proxy war, that all of the assets are working in concert together, not just Americans and Israelis. They're the leading sort of they're the leaders of this, but there's a whole army behind it of NATO forces, of regional allies who are there to like pick up the pieces, right? So that pathetic scene out of Kuwait of a bunch of vassalized Kuwaitis begging, when they find, like first they're like, when they see that this pilot has fallen and they think it's Iranian, they think the pilot's Iranian, they're like hostile. And then they realize that it's like a white Yankee savior and they start bowing to their feet and kissing them. I mean, not really, but it's effectively what they did. And it's like, to me, like the most disgusting thing. You're thanking people who have been destroying these lands, but in reality, it's actually fair they do that because that country is defended by these pilots. Like it is in reality. Like that's what it comes down to. But when you say that out loud, it sounds kind of ridiculous. That like a sovereign independent country like Kuwait or Saudi Arabia needs a bunch of like Midwestern American fighter pilots to control and secure their sovereignty. Like this is not how it's supposed to work, right? Like sovereignty is something you grow from the inside, and it's not something that you can just pay for and lease, right? I remember the UAE, was it the UAE or was it? Yeah, it was the UAE. The UAE has like a space program. Okay, like a space program. Do you guys know about this? I feel like a game show host. Do you know about this, folks? Do you know about this? That it's basically Japanese people who did the engineering and Brits who launched it. That's the UAE space, and the UAE
but
paid
that's
for
everything in the UAE.
Yes, exactly.
The meal that you eat is like, okay, there were like, Filipinos or people from Bangladesh imported in under slave labor, the kafala system, meaning we keep your passport, you have no rights, and you get treated like crap. Basically nothing happens there without all of this, imported labor. So why would we think at the upper echelons of any of the state security, military, administrative, you bring in Egyptians to be the policemen, you bring, Palestinians back in the day to be the engineers, because they were very educated and all of that, to do the civil engineering and all that and work with the American companies that build all the big high rises. So nothing there is being done and produced. These are enclaves of Western global capital and the globalized labor, market. And they're so similar in a way to the Israel project. I mean, that's what we were saying at the beginning, is that these are like mini Zionist entities, and that's why they ally with them, is because they're colonial, post-colonial. They're not settler colonial, but they're like the indigenous stay as an elite, but then you bring a subordinate to the empire, but a comprador elite. But so instead of like bringing, all the, kind of people as settler colonists, you bring them as, kind of settler labor subordinates, indentured. It's like the slaves, kind of indentured labor and slave system. It's like a plantation. It's like a, new style Western, plantation economy, yeah.
But and that's the thing. How do you rebuild that? That you can't rebuild this. What they lost, what they are losing every day, you can't just click your heels and put it back, because all that stuff was built with Iran's permission. Like, that's what everyone is coming to realize, that like the global economy and in fact the US military machine itself in the Arab Iranian region exists because the Iranians allowed it to exist. Now the country that is the biggest, the most powerful, the most dangerous, the most independent of the region has now said, no, you shall not pass. This is over for you, buddy. Like, you can't do that, because they have no choice now. Now they have a mandate from their own people to do that. If Iran, like someone said this to me earlier, like a friend of mine said this to me earlier, like, why didn't Iran do all this after October 7th? It's like, well, October 7th, like, what would they have done? Like, what like, they would have like started firing missiles from Iran right there. Then the US would have instantly joined. And in reality, that the weapons that were developed, that were like dropped on Gaza, would be dropped across the region, including Iran, which is not to say that like it was better that they dropped in Gaza, but that this battle is a very serious one, and it requires multiple fronts, and each front absorbs their own blows. Obviously, the most severe blows have been taken by Gaza, by the Palestinians in Gaza, but huge blows obviously taken in South Lebanon, across Lebanon. And then now it's Iran's turn. Well, before that, it was also Yemen. Syria was a 15-year dirty war, which is of itself its own mind-boggling level
part
of evil.
This, that you're saying is like, and this is the piece, is that it brings to light the racist discourse that we're used to. That somehow these sort of people, particularly the resistance, are just some barbaric, violent fuck that just go around wanting to destroy everything, rather than extremely sophisticated thinkers around what resistance means, around the ethics of resistance. Adnan was saying before about how religiosity plays into this, about a long-term, right, thinking and planning for the region. The sort of racist discourse that we're inundated by is this sort of projection of white Eurocentric ideals of like self-assuredness, or this idea of like a selfish reason for things. I feel like folks can't wrap their mind around what it means for entire swaths of people and resistance fighters to be unified around a larger cause. And this is the same thing for the Hezb. It's the same thing for Iran, that it's supremely arrogant to think that people are just going to be, let's just jump in right now and like endanger an entire fucking region. That's the projection. The projection is that Iran or Yemen or Lebanon with the Hezb or Hamas or whoever it is wants to just drag people in and cause destruction. That is what empire does. That's the inversion, right? And so I think us also being precise around, and we can sort of wonder and want people to join in. I think many of us have been like over the last 2.5 years saying, where is the sort of larger response that we're seeing now to this impunity? Because it's been so horrifying to see. And then also going back to revolutionary comrades who say, trust the people who are fighting, trust the resistance to be able to have strategic ideas and planning together around a longer term process that we're actually seeing right now, right? That has to include all the GCC states. If you did just one, nothing. I mean, the hope is that all of the GCC states will come together and say enough, right? Because if you just have one, what's the point? We know that the empire just cannibalizes one state and says, fuck you, we don't care. It's just one of you. So I think there's also pushing up against the Islamophobic and racist discourse about the global South. I think this is the other thing that I wanted to say to you, is that it's really important for us to see the ways in which imperial discourse contracts and expands whenever it wants, right? When Qatar was holding the World Cup, there are all the ways in which every liberal, asshole from Europe and from the United States was coming to rally against the labor regime, right? The abuses of labor. Now, we should do that, but we should do that for precise reasons of like, how do states like this get constructed? A sort of global reading around the exploitation of labor, about how capitalism plays into that. Certainly the corruption of FIFA. All these sorts of things should come together, but it gets mobilized in such an Islamophobic way. Where are those people now? Right? You're fine to be able to mobilize when you can, when like Islamophobia is so easy to mobilize. People have no problem doing that. Now you're doing that, of course, on the flip side against Iran. But the point is to really track the ways in which imperial discourse and imperialism in general contains its contradiction. Like, there's no contradiction in it for it. People can swing. This is why I think we see liberals swing from side to side and they don't care. There's like no up or down for them, because in the end, the goal is to stabilize empire for them. It is not actually to dismantle the conditions of suffering that would allow GCC states to exploit laborers from the global South for their own capital gain, and to bring in expats and have a hierarchy of who's important and who's not. It's never about that, right? So even as I think part of staying clear is really tracking the ways in which imperial discourse is mobilized against who, why now. That's why the trolls on the Instagram page, Jay, like a promise made, a promise kept. Right? It's like, who are you trying to stabilize?
Okay, so Instagram is also interesting because Instagram is a huge thing for Iranians. So Instagram, you'll run into a ton of this bot stuff. Like they own, like Iranian monarchists and like regime changers own Instagram to a degree that's like shocking. I mean, Iranian resistoids will go to Twitter. I know because that's where I live, but unfortunately, Instagram, Facebook and stuff, it's all just littered with bots and just various science bots. I mean, that's the thing. Like, our social media environments are so poisoned too in all of this, that even before this, you had the problem of bots and like whatever. And just like the horrible, like if you look in the Persian online sphere, it's all the worst. Like everybody's saying, "Oh, I'm gonna rape your mother. I'm gonna rape your mother. Oh, Dev, you fuck your, what are like the worst things you can say." And it's all just like bots program. I know the Arabic has that too, but the Iranian ones are particularly nasty because a lot of it actually is Unit 8200. Like they have these like troll farms in the entity, and like they save all their nastiest things for us. Because remember, part of this project is the Balkanization of Iran. And that Balkanization, for that first step of Balkanization, you need everyone to hate other Iranians. You need Iranians to hate other Iranians, which is to say. So like, that's why they're like, that's why I never really liked the whole like, oh, who's got the worst diaspora? Who's got the worst diaspora? It's not who's the worst. It's more that the people who get platformed and the people who get pushed as representatives are like ass-eating psycho-fascist, like loser gusanos. Like, that's not representative. Like, a lot of Iranians don't give a shit. But then what do? They find people who are resistant to this. So like, some guy had a picture of Khamenei on his back, on the back of his car. These people take a picture with the license plate. They put it online on their big doxing accounts. Ezra Levant, who's a fascist journalist here with, I think, Rebel News, he retweets it, quote tweets, "deport." Right? Like, that's the environment we're in. We're in like the same fascist environment here in Canada, which is to say, like that fascist environment. And they use Iranian fascists as their vanguard because it's more useful to see us fighting with other Iranians, because it says, look, you guys are a bunch of disunited freaks. I've seen this movie before in Syria, right? But remember, in Syria, they had an army of mercenaries getting fed into the country for years and years, establishing a foothold in Idlib, and it's right on the Turkish border. Iran is not that situation. It can't be infiltrated in the same way. A lot of it is mountainous. A lot of people have to like travel down like, like really precarious roads that like any drone could see, right? Like it's not vast swaths of desert connected to other countries that are also desert, borderline in the desert where you can just move around and stuff. Like this is mountains, this is oceans, like whatever. Like you can't, Iran is like a tough nut to crack. And so I guess in all of this, which is to say is that we, in our ways here and how we talk and how we discuss things, we have to navigate around the walls of this, like of these double standards. But it's better for us in the long term because it forces you to like come up with arguments that like, you can't, that like otherwise wouldn't come to you because you're like, otherwise you'd be part of like the ruling discursive regime, which is Iran bad, Iran bad, Iran bad. But I've never seen that regime, that discursive regime suffer this much. I'll be honest, like nothing makes Iran look good than smashing a bunch of like imperialists, like, and their like weaponry, like the things that people like Iran is doing. The people that Iran back, people also like, right? So like your favorite's favorite is Iranian, maybe. Like Yasser, like your like Yahya Sinwar like loved Khamenei, right? Like if Khamenei is good enough for Yahya Sinwar, like he should be good enough for you too. Like if you trust Yahya Sinwar, you should trust him and go all the way. Like it's funny too because people don't have this hang up as much. They do with Hezbollah. They have the same thing. I feel like it was easier for people to get on the Hezbollah train, even if it was still like you can't post his face and whatever. But that charisma he had, and I don't know what it is, maybe just Lebanese people in general being like 4 million people that sound like 400 million because they're so loud. And like they make themselves known in any space. And that's coming from Iranians. So that says a lot. It's like, but it's just the fact that Lebanon, for its size, punches above its weight in terms of its historical importance of like where it's located, but also what its people have done, the people of the South, and just the immense. And so, but even then, I don't think people who would have said like vocally expressed their adoration for someone like Hassan Nasrallah, they would do that for Ali Khamenei. I don't think so. I think the decades of hexing of Iran just makes it too difficult, where people just see Iran and they flinch and they like, just the sphincter gets tightened and you would just like worry that you don't want to say anything to offend the Zionists. Like defending Iran is the last horizon, I think. Like Syria used to be that. And now Syria's gone. There's nothing to defend. So it's run by Al-Qaeda. But now it's like Iran and its allies represent to our ruling class, demons, like baby-eating demons, like the worst possible thing on the planet, which is why they're unleashing incredible amount of violence on Iran, on Iranians, and they have been. I don't know where I was going with this, but it was something you said about just the racism. Oh shit, my computer's dying. Fuck. Like the racism of all this is like off the charts, but we have to. That's a given. We have to. That's like how we start.
No, thank you for that, Sina. So I'm gonna play a couple of clips, some different clips. I'll play like 3 of them, and then we can see what kind of conversation comes up from them. The first one I'm gonna play actually has a lot to do with the racism, and I'm sure a lot of people saw it. I know some of you were trying to avoid it, Lara, but I'm going to impose it upon you anyway. And yeah, I mean, it speaks to the racism. And it comes from a beloved liberal source among, whatever, liberal, anti-right-wing people, Jon Stewart.
Pro-US.
Very pro-US. And you see that here, right? So I'm going to play this real quick. It's just 30 seconds. Is it sharing? Yeah. Okay.
So wait a minute. Let me get this straight. America and Israel attack Iran. And Iran's answer is to just attack everybody. Having been in a bar fight or 2 in my life, I'm pretty sure the worst thing you can do during a 2-on-1 beatdown is slap everyone else. Hey, Not every part of me is getting punched. What are you doing? What are you doing? Hey, you!
All right, so that's one. I'm gonna play 3 of them, and then you all can.
And that guy's never been in a bar fight ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the very.
If he
first,
was getting
like,
the shit kicked out of him.
totally false thing.
I don't think Ali Khamenei was ever in a bar fight either, but not
He
because
was in a
was
war,
cool.
though. He was in a war.
Yeah, he's been in war.
All right. Yeah, I'm gonna play Ali Khamenei now, and this is for informational purposes only, everyone. All right. But I do think it's important. I'll just say this ahead of time. You know, you all mentioned it, but I do think this is one of the things that's different in the era that we are in, and it's a product of the internet and the type of surveillance and control that the internet produces, right? So on one hand, it gives us this ability to feel like, oh, we're talking with a lot of people. We've got, you know, almost 800 people watching this on various platforms right now, which is not a lot, obviously, in kind of a global sense or compared with the competitors that we have in the media environment. But for those of us who are on the left or anti-imperialists, right, like that's a good number of people to get within a space or a room to have a conversation. So it feels good. But on the flip side, if you were in a room and in a conversation with people, you know, in an anti-colonial solidarity movement, historically anti-imperialist, you could say, you know, our job is to support these resistance forces, these anti-colonial movements, these figures. Let's look at Amilcar Cabral. Let's look at, you know, Frantz Fanon. Let's look at, you know, and we could easily and without any fear, you know, let's look at Ho Chi Minh and, you know, the People's Army in Vietnam, right? Or, you know, let's look at the Chinese Revolution, and without any fear, we could talk about these things. Now, obviously, you get branded as a communist. You know, it's not to say that there wasn't prices to pay for people for engaging in that sort of activity or anything like that, but your speech would only be, you know, whatever you felt necessary. If you felt any need to self-censor at all, it was really just because of your own sort of risk aversion. Whereas we have an added calculus, which is, will this get us taken off of these platforms and then inhibit our ability to have these conversations with the people that we want to be able to have them with? And I think that that's, you know, it's just, it introduces a new calculus. And so I always think that people should, as viewers, understand that that's part of the equation on any, no matter who it is, any left-wing platform. They're making some kind of assessment of their own risk, you know, their willingness. I mean, Benji's a good example, having lost his YouTube, you know, platform just for talking about Keir Starmer, you know, it seems, and his, you know, college experiences there. So, you know, that this happens, right? People get demonetized. Black Liberation Media was demonetized for like 2.5 years or something like that. And people get taken off, and people get forced to censor their videos in certain ways, like Electronic Intifada, for instance. They do their resistance reports, right? But they have to actually make edits to the videos that they show so as not to, you know, upset the YouTube censors and make them get their whole video taken down, which then prevents people from seeing all their other coverage, right? So I just wanted to say that before I play this. All right.
ما اونچه باید بکنیم انجام میدیم، اونچه باید گفت هم گفتیم و خواهیم گفت. من جان ناقابلی دارم جسم ناقصی دارم اندک آبرویی هم دارم که این رو هم خود شما به ما دادید. همه اینها رو من کف دست گرفتم، در راه این انقلاب و در راه اسلام فدا خواهم کرد. اینها هم نثار شما باشه. سید ما مولای ما دعا کن برای ما. صاحب ما تویی، صاحب این کشور تویی، صاحب این انقلاب تویی. پشتیبان ما شما هستید. ما این راه رو ادامه خواهیم داد، با قدرت هم ادامه خواهیم داد. در این راه ما رو با دعای خود، با حمایت خود، با توجه خود پشتیبانی بفرما. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. اذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله افواجا فسبح بحمد ربك.
Yeah, so if we get taken down for that, it's because they don't want you all to see that. So I'm glad that we could play that for folks. I know that maybe not everybody can see the words, and so just to give a little bit of a summary, he's just, basically saying that, his life is a kind of small thing, right, and that he has a disabled body. But he's willing to sacrifice for the revolution, and it is your revolution in Islam. And there's a little more to it. I don't know if Adnan, you want to add on a little bit to what he's saying there.
Well, I think I summarized a lot of what he said. I think what's really touching about it is how much it affected everybody hearing him say that in the audience. When he said, I have, very little value in my life, everyone was like, oh, like, how could you say that? And when he said, I have this disabled, body, but I would sacrifice it, for you, just
because he survived assassination. That was an assassination attempt too.
That's why he doesn't have the use of his right arm properly, is because it was an assassination by MEK terrorists, early 1981, I think. So it's been a long time. But I think, what he was saying there was this revolution and kind of the ideals behind it, demand us not being so focused just on ourselves. I can imagine that this is, you're under sanctions, like everybody's aspirations for life are subordinated and constrained, and you're suffering and you can't do what you want. And this is a country that, of course, has so much potential, and it has made a decision that it's going to stand for sovereignty rather than subservience. And that means that if you have that kind of dignity and if you have those principles, you have to recognize that there will be a cost, but it's an ennobling cost. And I mean, it's a sacrifice that he's willing to make. And he says this in a way that really elicited from the audience so much like connection and emotion. And that's why whatever people want to say, like having these, fools in Toronto dancing, in the streets, celebrating, like just so disgusting. They reveal really what they are about. Or the, kind of Israelis, dancing, that they, that hear this. It just is a big contrast, and we should look carefully at how do the leaders of real resistance movements conduct themselves, with humility, with a sense of sacrifice, and with a way of trying to empower the, strength to the people. That's what he's doing there. He's saying, you can do without me. I will sacrifice, but you have to carry this work on, even without me. So anyway, that's kind of what I took out from it. And why he has been celebrated. I showed a kind of photo of him with Thomas Sankara. There's videos around with him with, South African figures, including Mandela. Mandela said some amazing things about him. This is not window dressing that, like, the street that the British embassy is on is called Bobby Sands Avenue. This is not a joke. This is how this revolutionary project commits itself and sees itself as part of the struggle against oppression and colonialism and imperialism globally. That has to be, honored. And this is the reason why I keep coming back and emphasizing this so much about him. And I really suggest everybody go listen to Ali Alizade's discussion on Gray Zone with Max Blumenthal. It wasn't really a discussion. He told us, it was Alizadeh doing his thing. And he, I think, really captured and explained in a way I couldn't, because I'm more on the emotional religious symbology, but he, in a language about just how important he was for the national security structure, for the missile programs, for everything that he's done to try and raise his country and its people up, and what has been unleashed by this murder and assassination of him. That, as I think Sina was saying, I think Sina is absolutely correct that he was prepared for this. He's been ready for this. He's been waiting for this. And he knew that the effect of his martyrdom could be something that in the last moment of his life would aid his country immeasurably and the peoples of the world and this region by inspiring people. And so it kills me when I see these people with no understanding of history and of resistance, either both sidesing it or celebrating, even on the left, some people celebrating, that this figure. Why? Because of everything that Lara was saying, and that I mentioned some part of it before, the Islamophobia, the hatred of like a different kind of way of having a resistance culture. They're not all going to be the same. They're not all going to be, based on, a certain idea of what secularism is. People have to use the resources that are available from their conditions and their society and culture to free themselves. And this is a resource. Of course, it's a resource that can be used for Salafist, kind of brutal, barbaric, pro-Zionist, all those ISIS people, they're just pro-Zionists, all these Salafists. Or you can use it, for the liberation of your soul, your mind, your body, and your people. And that's what they're trying to do. And it should just be recognized. That's real. It may not be how we would frame it, but we have to see him in the pantheon of those who fought, against imperialism, genuinely understood what imperialism was, and acted with great rational, this whole idea that Iran is a theocratic, kind of state, and you can't reason with them, and they're just, it's exactly the opposite. He was restrained, this strategic deterrence, so restrained. Alizadeh says that he emphasized that you don't just go for distance in your missiles, in your development, in your missile program, but accuracy and precision was so important for him, because he believed you should not hurt innocent civilians. So he said, no, we're not going to use these missiles until you perfect the precision, so that we strike what we want to strike, and we don't have a case, where, civilians are killed. And that's why he also believed, WMDs were not allowed, weapons of mass destruction, because they're immoral, right? So, you got to really respect, there's a lot of differences people could have, but at least you have to respect, his contributions to the culture of resistance, in Iran.
Yeah, thanks Adnan for that. And I think this is the place where, this is the parallel for me to the Jon Stewart, which seems weird, but it actually does, because there's a sort of arrogance to an analysis that doesn't take into account people's larger commitments. Like he's incredibly coherent. I don't care what you actually think about that. There's a coherence to his position. And I think that folks who offer these sort of surprise things, like, why are you surprised that he was next to Thomas Sankara, right? In the same ways that people cannot wrap their minds around the PFLP fighting alongside Hamas. And that betrays a particular position of usually global North ideas about solidarity, about what you do when you're sort of fighting a common enemy, right? If the common enemy is imperialism, if the common enemy is capitalism, if the common enemy is a Zionist settler state, what are the ways in which you actually create possibilities of solidarity, even if your ideological positions differ vastly? And that has been actually the case in our region for a long time. That gets written out of history. That's why you see these surprise, like, oh, how does the Communist Party of Lebanon side with Hezbollah? Well, we know why. We know why this is the case. And that doesn't mean they haven't had their debates and their sort of struggles over time. But that's the point of being a unified front against imperialism, is that you're actually supposed to work out these contradictions because you understand what the source of actual suffering is to go to kind of go back to that, right? And I think this is the piece that a lot of people will miss, and where the racism then comes in, because there's something really, as I was watching that, I was thinking psychologically and affectively, as I often do, about the long project, and I think Sina was saying this, and so were you, Adnan, the long project of Islamophobia and demonizing Iran, where I can anticipate people's sort of discomfort or being unsettled, hearing actually the responses of the audience and having immediate associations about the singular sort of threat of Islam, particularly when it's large groups and you have a leader that's in front. Like the construction of that is actually extremely important. And you probably have all had this experience, but when I moved to this settler colony of the United States and recognized that even atheists had a special hate towards Islam. Like, even in your atheism, you think Islam is that much more, dangerous. And that was a huge wake-up call to me. I was like, this is not about, because if you're an atheist, why do you hate all fucking religions the same way? There was something very particular about a United States atheist leftist position against Islam that really sort of tied all of this in. And that was a huge awakening and a lesson for me around what that constituted and the project, and how successful that sort of propaganda and psyops has been, so that even when people watch this, there's a way in which they might be blocked in their identifications with the actual target of blocking identifications because it's representative of something, or because they feel like somehow there's this like special magic around Islam that you have to like join fully, or it's going to fully subsume you. We see this rhetoric, of course, right? The redundant Sharia law, or like somehow watching this is going to make you, have to like put a hijab on or something, like God forbid, and the Islamophobia in that association anyway. Right. But that is large of a part of a larger project. And I think that stays me, because that's what I was sort of feeling as I was watching this. I was like, what is this special place of making people turn away from that and really turn away in incredibly vicious, unempathic, non-compassionate, like, how can you not hear the words that are actually being said and attribute that to an actual alignment with a religious position that this person truly believes in and has a coherence? I don't care politically where you stand on this, right? In the same way that Hassan Nasrallah had the same sort of position, that these are coherent positions within their own political religious tradition. And I think the inability for folks to kind of hold on to that betrays something really important about the ideological propaganda machine that they've been subjected to.
100%, Lara. I don't think you can understand the global politics, but especially politics of the West, without having a very deep and long historical understanding of the importance of Islamophobia in structuring politics in the West. It's just really absolutely essential. And you can see the costs of it. Where is the solidarity and the empathy that would and should be there? You know, the fact it's all, and I think it's very important to recognize and understand that it's not just simple Islamophobia. You said something about like, well, we just don't like Muslims. That's there, but you said something very important and very interesting to me, because I study this problem of religious sovereignty and the way in which that is seen is particularly anathema. And why was there so much like, you know, kind of negative reaction to the huge marches of solidarity in like London, for example, for Palestinians in October, November, December, late 2023, 2024, where they were called hate marches, Hamas marches, and all of that? It was because the spectacle, not just of like seeing that there's large numbers, the spectacle of people who are visibly Muslim and carrying Muslimness with them, hijabbed women, men with beards, being politically active and contesting space in the public sphere, that was horribly destabilizing, made people so fearful that they then said, oh, well, we got to put in these special new kinds of suppressions of speech and political organizing and so on, because, you know, these are dangerous marches. You know, there was a kind of political psychology in people's response. And the same thing is the problem, is we support, you know, Palestinian rights, but the resistance, you know, because they're organized and expressing political and military power in an organized way to demand sovereignty. Same with the problem of Iran is the epic level, because again, it's the only sovereign country. It's a sovereign country of size and resources and potential that is directed by these, you know, Muslim clerics. Like that is just like the nightmare scenario in the political imagination of the West. And it means that they can't see and understand this is a mechanism just for people gaining democracy and justice of some control over their lives. Democracy in a deep sense. Like, you know, I don't mean that like, you know, it's exactly the same as liberal democracy, but speaking, this is a popular revolution that happened. They do have frankly, Iran's government is more responsive to the wishes of its people. I'm not saying it's the way it, you know, one would, you know, necessarily, you know, if they weren't under sanctions and they weren't under war, maybe, you know, there would be like an opportunity to have like a different kind of, you know, civil you know, kind of balance and so on. Like there are many, you know, possibilities, but it is even under these circumstances more responsive to the wishes and will of its people than like our government, the United States government. 75% of people don't want this war. You know, 60-70% of people want you know, healthcare. They don't do any of these things for you. You know, it's an oligarchic elite that rules. The Epstein elite, the Epstein class runs this country. That, like, you know, democracy is not really manifested, even if some of its forms have been, and even those are now like under threat, because why bother? You know, like, let's end the charade, right? This is what the Trump kind of fascist march is threatening. Whereas in Iran, okay, you have, you know, people protesting that they don't want to wear, you know, the hijab. And, you know, when I was there in December, they're not enforcing it. It's clearly gone out that, you know, we don't want, and the Khamenei himself said, look this, don't look at people who are not wearing hijab properly. That's how he framed it or phrased it, as like bad Muslims or against the revolution. Like, just, you know, like, be tolerant of that. And they recognize politically, you want to like continue to have this project of sovereignty, you have to make concessions. The society has moved on in a direction, and you have to be responsive to that. They said when there were protests that touched off, you know, December 28th, you know, with the manipulations of the, you know, Iranian rial, the currency, that, like, you know, forced the Bazaris to, you know, come out, the merchant class in the Grand Bazaar in Tehran, to come out and say this is intolerable. We've just, depreciated, the currency is depreciated, and we need a solution. The government said, well, these are legitimate grievances, and we'll try and do something about it. I mean, to be honest, they are at least, if not more, but the specter of organized Muslim sovereign power is somehow anathema and antithetical, and it prevents us from having solidarity and recognizing their genuine anti-imperialist role right now in global world history. Like, that just needs to be recognized, and we're prevented from doing so, even many of us on the left, because of this deep-seated and ingrained Islamophobia that Lara was talking about. It has serious consequences as a result.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely does, and it has a lot of consequences in terms of even, the conversations that people are willing to have and the people they're willing to feature and all of it. Yeah. Even on the left and among, folks who should be allies. Right. And I want to play something. So this is a clip from a video that went out from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So just to contextualize this a little bit, it was founded by David Abshir and Arleigh Burke. Arleigh Burke was, an admiral in the Navy, U.S. Navy, was in World War II and Korea War veteran, and was the chief of naval operations during the Eisenhower and Kennedy administrations. And Abshir was President Ronald Reagan's special counselor and United States permanent representative to NATO, right? So just say that context to say this is a Washington, D.C. imperialist think tank that is talking about this. It's not, because they're about to talk about psychological operations. And I want folks to be clear that it's not those of us on the left that are saying this. This is just them talking about this is what we're doing right now. So, all right. So let's see. Yes. All right.
Leaning into psychological operations for cyber. So one kind of snippy little thing it seems like the Israelis may have done here was go after a religious calendar app, the kind of thing that tells you it's time to pray. It's Ramadan right now, right? So of course it's time to break your fast, and that there was a message that appeared on the app that said something like the time of reckoning is here, and encouraged people to throw out their support for the regime and come out into the streets. Now that is a very direct message to a group of people that may be more likely to be regime supporters. And that kind of psychological operation, we've seen suggestions there were attacks against Iranian news networks, a lot of messaging to the population that, look, your regime is weaker than they're letting on. It is time to step up and perhaps try to overthrow them. What we've seen is a lot of leaning into
All right, so that's first one. And then I'm going to play a second one real quick, which is really kind of related. And I think it will give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about the psychological operations that are going on, as well as this next one's from mainstream media, right? And so we'll see it kind of in our context as well.
Fascinating conversation with a senior Iranian Kurdish official here who told us that Iranian Kurdish opposition forces are preparing for a ground operation inside Western Iran in the coming days. And he told us that they're anticipating US and Israeli support as part of this operation. He wouldn't give us any details as to what that support looks like. And he said that US President Donald Trump had actually called the leader of one of these Iranian Kurdish opposition parties just today. Now, this comes as we're also getting new reporting from my colleagues, Natasha Bertrand, Elena Treen, and Zachary Cohen in DC, that the CIA has been working to arm Kurdish forces with the aim of fomenting a popular uprising inside Iran. Obviously, This is fraught with risk and complexity for many reasons, not least of which these Iranian Kurdish forces are operating here in Iraqi Kurdistan. And the Iraqi Kurdish leadership here does not want to be seen as anything other than neutral in this conflict. The relationships that they have, challenging that they may be, with Turkey and with Iran are important to them. We just had a
So that's the end of that little clip. And I mean, obviously, like the first one, I'd love to hear your kind of, thoughts on the psychological operations. The reason I lumped these two together is that I also think that, if you're planning something like this, it's a very interesting choice to plant a reporter in to talk to the leadership of the proposed, Kurdish incursion, and then also embed CIA, sources that are telling you that they're the ones who are arming and that Israel and the US would be the ones supporting, given obviously how that will be read and interpreted by, folks in the region. Obviously, when we look at the history of, Kurdish forces within Iraq, within Syria, right? It wouldn't be surprising, of course, but it's interesting to just sort of let it out, which, in another way, and I know Sina's going to hop on too, so I'm curious to hear all of your kind of thoughts on this. But, it raises a big question of why would you just come out and do, a big news story, about this collaboration. So anyway.
Yeah, that seems very suspicious to me, and my initial sense was just that perhaps this really has a lot more to do with kind of, could be cover, as you're saying, and they will use as many ways that they can infiltrate and continue to do what they did in turning, for example, the economic protests in Iran into violent riots to try and foment disorder, chaos, and so-called regime change. But I think the other possibility is that they know, I think they want this to get out, maybe just so they might try and inspire people, to join in, because if you just have some, troops brought in, from irregular troops brought in from, northern Iraq into, from the Kurdish areas of northern Iraq into Iran. I mean, what's the chances that they're really going to make a big military, impact in this vast, huge country that is right now totally mobilized? I think what they would want to do is try and create a sense that there are uprisings taking place and encourage, people in some of the big cities or whatever, all the things that they've been trying to get them to do that so far have not happened. And I think that's something very, very important to emphasize, that it's been 3, 4, now we're in the 5th day, and there's no evidence and sign of, defections, of, loss of command and control within, the Iranian military and political leadership. They thought that the decapitations were going to send, these like Oriental barbarians, into paralysis when the Oriental despot was removed, and it hasn't turned out to be that way. There's been a lot of planning, there's a lot of organization, coordination, and you would have also seen loyalty of serious kind that they also couldn't really quite understand, that like trying to bomb people, to get them to be turncoats, that's just not going to work in this context. It's sometimes they've been able to use these colonial strategies to split, try and get a military figure or somebody to betray their country. But I think in the atmosphere, and this may have been part of the prophylactic dimension of strike against a school that kills 160 schoolgirls by the Epstein Empire on the very first day, the very first morning. That's what you know now about the nature of this attack. And the second thing is, by the end of the day, you really have lost your, warrior pope, as Alizadeh said. Beautiful phrase he pulled together. Who was a balancer, an integrator, of different groups, and was a force of a kind of restraint in a certain way, okay? And not only on the nuclear issue, but also as the missile development, the targeting, etc. And now you've removed that person, that instead it unleashed, as Alizadeh said, a kind of revolutionary spirit and commitment in which it's not actually possible that if you want to be one of these corrupt, sort of weaker reformer types, and there are corrupt elements who've, under sanctions and black market, sorts of things, people who might be in it for themselves kind of thing, you try and step out right now when you've got like millions of people who are celebrating what it means to the legacy of the supreme leader who's been martyred and has revived and revivified the feeling of revolutionary struggle and being part of a broader, world historical cause, that is of justice. And you want to like try and make a deal, make a bargain, good luck. You'll be eaten alive. They are going to rip you apart. Like, you cannot just try and negotiate. That's been so important. And Ali Larijani, who's head of the kind of new council, is like, no, there's not going to be negotiations for a while. And that is because they're committed now to really some goals, get the bases out, all of the things we've been talking about. So to my mind, I think this is a gambit that is based on the same kind of false presumptions, but that's the only card that they have to play to try and relieve themselves from the burden they have now created, which is you have a full-on war that you have to deal with, and they don't want to commit ground troops to this. They don't want to suffer huge losses, so they have to find ways to try and foment some kind of internal discord, uprising, let the Iranian people themselves suffer, by encouraging them to somehow rise up against like the IRGC and create a civil war and a bloodbath. I mean, of course, the imperialists don't mind sacrificing you, for that. But the thing that they haven't understood is maybe the Iranians are not stupid enough to fall into that now, they're not going to do that. So I think that's how I would analyze it, as one of these kind of gambits to try and cause a kind of generalized uprising, because militarily speaking, it would accomplish very little. So why not say it so that they can see whether this will inspire some others, that this would be an opportunity, right? I think that's maybe what's going on.
Right on, Adnan. And I know that you have to jump off in a minute. Before you go, I just want to thank you. You've brought so much wisdom and analysis today, as you always do. And I just encourage anybody on Millennials that's not subscribed to the Adnan Hussein show to do so, to follow your work. Check out the work that you did last a couple times now with Resistance is Fertile. Just solidarity to you as always, comrade.
Thank you all so much. It's wonderful that you've created this space. It's great to be with comrades. I mean, look, everybody's busy and all of that, but this means so much to all of us and to the audience, and creating this space to keep our spirits up, keep us dedicated and active. So, until victory, a Nasser, comes from God, as they were chanting. They're not going to back down. We have to do our part. I really appreciate all the work everybody is doing. And go to East as a podcast, Psychic Militancy, massive new resource. And of course, Millennials are Killing Capitalism. If you're watching on my stream and you don't already know those, what are you doing? You got to be out there and support the whole group. But so thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you all again sometime soon.
Absolutely.
Thank
you, Adnan.
Yeah. Can I just jump in about the psychological operations piece?
Yeah, please.
Who would I be if I didn't say the psychological operations? First of all, just the arrogant glee in her face as she's talking about this. right? About, as she's reporting on this, tells us everything that we need to know. And there's a way in which we can like roll our eyes at the arrogance and the ridiculousness of like, you know, sending messages on an app or whatever it is. But like, and I think we should, in as much as how ridiculous imperial stooges are. But on the other hand, to recognize that even when it looks so obvious to us, that none of this could work if there weren't an entire infrastructure that allowed it to be animated. And that's the piece that should terrify us, right? This kind of ties into everything we've been talking about the longer political project where a state can infiltrate an app. That's number one, right? Just like you had them infiltrate beepers and blow people up in Lebanon. Like these things, I think the level of horrors that we're inundated by sometimes, even though we're shocked by, and we were sort of stopping ourselves and recognize how violent it is, I worry that the larger mechanics of it get lost in the actual horror, where we might forget all the moving pieces and the infrastructure that has to be in place to allow for something like that to happen. So for her to come up and just talk about both these women, to be able to talk in a way with such confidence, and the confidence is not just the arrogance of empire, it's the confidence understanding that there's an audience on which this lands, and that will compel and impel an actual association and an action. There is no point to say any of this if you didn't think there was a terrain for it to fall on. And that terrain is never innocent. It's actually supposed to be mobilized towards a certain end, right? If nothing else, it's meant to be a confusion monger, like Fanon might say, where it fucks up people's minds, even those who are, you know, apart from militants, because we know that counterinsurgency doesn't work on militants, which is why you need people to fucking hate people, right? But apart from militants, people who sort of by and large might understand what's happening, piecing together everything, and this sort of messaging is pumped into it, that kind of works on other myths of empire to create an interior space in which people are confused, despairing, think there's nothing to be done anymore, disidentify from the actual struggles on the ground, or misread this as somehow support, of course, for those people who like actually don't support the regime, but now an app magically told them, here you go out into the streets and go against nothing works like that. And I think many people know that, but I feel a real urgency to say that nothing that's organic works like that. It needs to be part of a larger project and an infrastructure that, by the way, has to be practiced every day. Like there's no such thing as power if power is not practicing its power, right? So we can think about all these ways in which all the mechanics have to fit together. You have crude power, and then you have these sorts of things that are meant to do a particular thing. And again, those of us who don't follow mainstream can roll our eyes, but we can think about the ways in which conscription happens. And conscription works because there's a larger infrastructure for people to be conscripted into. And that's why it's important, honestly, to be continuing to have these conversations so we can stay focused on it, so we can understand how the mechanics of this work, so that we can sort of commit to, at the very least, not allowing this sort of messaging to settle within our interiority without any challenge, without constant antagonism. That's what's needed. I don't want us to sort of tap out just because we're not aligned with empire or we're politically sort of coherent. We are, I think, and also the infrastructure is ferocious. And that is why, you know, continuing to sort of pick apart the mechanics of it, our dear comrade Dylan Rodriguez always talks about it, is like, we have to think about lexical warfare. We have to think about it as a larger political project of the parameters, and an actual different theater of war. We are constantly at war. It's an asymmetrical war, but we are constantly at war. And these are the various sort of tactics that are involved in that. So I think it's actually really useful to watch these things, even as we can sort of laugh at how fucking ridiculous they are, is to really be in the habit of analyzing it and sort of breaking it down as part of our own weaponry against it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Sina will be back in just a minute, and look forward to hearing, his thoughts on this. But a few different things. I mean, so I also watched the ridiculous, pageantry and psychological warfare of the Pentagon briefing this morning with Pete Hegseth, who's just one of the most ridiculous human beings on the face of the earth. But he did this thing of talking about how, there's just going to be, what do you say, death and destruction raining from the sky all day long, in Iran. And so again, like the psychological warfare, and also this projection, right? Like, so I think this is really important too, is that in this moment where you have an empire which, sees itself losing, geopolitical hegemony in a lot of ways, in many ways. I mean, Iran recognizes this as an existential war, but also I don't think that the Epstein regime, US and Israel, would step into it also if they didn't also worry about it in those terms, in terms of, being able to maintain and ultimately start to pick apart, and I think this is part of what's going on right now with Venezuela, with Cuba, with Iran, obviously with Palestine, with Lebanon, like, is pick apart the pieces of this multipolarity structure, or the strategic depth of multipolarity. And particularly, I mean, obviously this relates to China, and the concerns that the United States has about China displacing them as a global hegemon. But I think that what's interesting, and I don't quite know how to assess it yet, but when they interview Trump or whatever, like, he's kind of like, well, we're just waiting for, they'll call us, kind of thing. We're waiting for them to say, oh, we want to negotiate. And now, and at first there was reports that they offered to negotiate right after killing, Ayatollah Khamenei, and then like that, the United States basically, no, that Iran said, no, we're not negotiating with you. Are you kidding? Like, you just assassinated our leader. Like, we're going to take out your strategic depth in our region. And
also, how many times have we been here before at the negotiating table? Like, enough already.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And every time you come to the negotiating table, you attack us, also. Yeah. But also this, this belief that because what happened in Venezuela, and I know that this is a challenging thing to talk about because it is still unfolding, and Venezuela has not lost all of its sovereignty, but its president has been kidnapped, and the statement that was put out after the attack on Iran, certainly seemed to suggest that the Venezuelan leadership is trying to walk some kind of line that doesn't upset the United States right now. And obviously they were forced to retract that based off of, very solid Chavista grassroots, Bolivarian grassroots, that is like, no, we're not saying like, Iran, don't attack other people in the region, or whatever that initial, statement said. But nonetheless, what the read, or what Empire has projected about Venezuela, right, is basically that, after they kidnapped Maduro, Venezuela was willing to negotiate with them, and willing to, and there's been the oil deals that have gone on and so on. And Venezuela is in a very difficult position. It has to navigate things. It doesn't have the same kind of military defenses that Iran has. And it's in the same hemisphere as the United States, without really any strategic allies with strong defenses in the hemisphere also. So it's a totally different context. But what's interesting is there's some, signaling that there's some signaling that the United States thought that it would go the same way, right? That they thought that Iran would just say, okay, well, now we see your power, we will do what you ask, we will come to the table. And in what it seems to also be true is that actually perhaps the opposite has happened, right? Which is that, they took out the leader who was the most, pragmatic, willing to, negotiate, not in a sense of like compromising, right? But willing to come to the table, willing to have talks, willing to say, we don't want weapons of mass destruction or nukes, or, we want to make sure that our defense is always, proportional, but not, not go full scale in terms of what we have in terms of military capabilities. And, but there's still a leadership structure in place. There's still continuity, right? And there's still the defensive capacity. And so you have that. And I think that the US is really clamoring now in this moment to try to figure out, okay, well, then what do we do next? And yeah, they can bomb, they will be able to launch aerial attacks. And that's basically all, interestingly, that Hegseth talked about in his briefing was just our air power, the air power of the United States and Israel. And we know that exists, and we know that it will predominantly, civilians will be the targets of that as well. But that doesn't mean that you can't bomb people into, desiring a better relationship with you. I mean, this is such an abuser, violent logic, and so, yeah, I mean, those are just some of the things that are on my mind right now. And Sina, if you're able to rejoin us, I would love to also hear your thoughts on those clips as well. But go ahead, Lara.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. It's an abusive relationship, and then people sort of want to say, oh, this is non-coercive. It's also supremely narcissistic in its idea about how leadership works. I think it betrays, again, the way that a Eurocentric sort of global north, certainly US centric jingoistic idea about the cult of a leader, right? That there is one leader and that everything flows from that, rather than a sort of larger cause that people are committed to, that, like we said before, that there's planning that's involved in it, there's succession plans. But when people are committed to a cause, and that cause is their liberation, because they have been under the boot of empire and an actual oppressive system for decades, if not more than half a century, right? It's the idea, the arrogance of thinking that, quote unquote, taking out one person is going to be what stops people from fighting for that cause is, number one, arrogance, but also it's an entire misattunement to the ways that oppressed people actually have the pulse on where the source of their suffering comes from. And it's why we can see something like Tawafan al-Aqsa in supposedly the most, utterly undeveloped place. And it is, I don't say supposedly because it's not. I say because that was part of the calculus of empire and Zionist arrogance, thinking that there's nothing that could possibly come out of it. And it shows us you are completely misattuned to the ways that people, particularly those indigenous to the land, will always marshal everything in them to fight for their liberation, which includes sacrifices that I think people in the imperial global north can't understand. That there are things that are larger than themselves, that there are things that are worth dying for. This is Ghassan Kanafani 101, by the way. This is not a new story, right? And I think the inability to sort of actually think about that, whether that's in Venezuela or Cuba or Iran or Lebanon or Syria or Yemen, wherever that is, that miscalculation actually is a really dangerous one for empire. And it's one that betrays and tells you who the bad guy is. Like, it always tells on itself. But Sina's back now, so he's remembered.
Yeah, Sina, I do have to wrap up soon, but I definitely want to hear from you before we go. Yeah, man.
No, yeah, the Clarissa Ward stuff is amazing. I think this is the explanation. God, my hair's so goofy. Look, I got a haircut yesterday. I have this weird bouffant thing happening. What's going on? So this it's interesting. I think the story, this is the same thing that happened in Iran. They were too proud of their own involvement to keep up the charade, because the charade here, because I actually disagreed with something you said, Lara, which is like, you need it to be real. So the effect of like astroturfed political campaigns don't, I don't want to say work or something to the effect of like, I mean, I'm mischaracterizing, but essentially in the sense, like, to me, like, you can overthrow governments with like a fake, like astroturfed, like regime change. Like that's easy. Yeah.
because the infrastructure exists
Yeah,
to do that.
and they did it to us. Like they did it to us in 53. In 53, there's a famous clip from Pathé of Persian revolt. And like they stage a revolt. Like staging a revolt is not hard. It's the response from the state that tells you like, okay, how is the maturity of this state? Can it withstand something like this? So right now, I think what's happening is that all of the imperialists, allies, everyone is standing in line and like reporting in. Like everyone's like, okay, like Colonel Kurdish Comprador Doodle here on your base. Like Mazloum Abdi, the head of the SDF, he lives on an American base. Okay, like the Syrian Democratic Forces gets its name from an American general. Like these are not like acts of like a sovereign force. These are acts of a proxy force. And there's a reason why you have heard a lot about Kurdish liberation struggle, because the people who run our society are on their side. Okay, so this is something we need to understand, that like in the 90s, after the Iraq War won, America occupied Iraq. People think that the occupation of Iraq began in 2003. It began in 1991 when they occupied the north and they declared a no-fly zone. It wasn't called an occupation, but it is an occupation. And they used Kurdish people's populations as the excuse, right? And that's when they started developing Erbil, which happens to be like heavily oil-rich area. And that's also what's on fire right now. One of the many places that America's imperial infrastructure is on fire right very now. Like literally, I just got a tweet. American embassy in Erbil is on fire. Like, so this is not, so it's before you had this fig leaf of like, yes, we are an independent movement. We are a Rojava, independent, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't buy it anymore. Don't pull this shit on me. If you like come to me with this stuff, I have like, you're blocked on site because I don't care anymore. It's clear that the so-called Kurdish movement is part and parcel of a Zionist remapping, an attempt to remap the map of the world. That's not like some controversial thing to say. It's obvious that like the dream of this ethno-state that Kurds will set up will be free, blah, blah, blah. Like ethno-states are bad. We all hate ethno-states. We don't like them. Look what they do. So the idea that anarchists are like advocating here for like a ethno-state on behalf of one ethnic minority is such a farcical thing. And that's why the Clarissa Awards exist. They are translators. They are compradors of a certain class. And now what's interesting is that whereas before it used to be men, now women are mostly doing it. Women are mostly doing the hard. Like if you look at all the Iranian like regime change op stuff, like of this round and like women life Zionism before that, like it's a ton of women who are leading it. Young, not even millennials, like young Zoomer women even. Women are what gets shared, right? Like that's, like you have to think like the imperialists, right? Women get shared more than men do. People like looking at women more than they like looking at men on their phones, at least. Maybe it's just...
Demo imperialism.
Well, a kind of, I mean, maybe you're saying like, oh, Sina, that's just you because you're like a straight male, but I don't think that's true. I would bet the bank that more women also, like straight cis women, also share women more with greater frequency than they do men on this stuff, on like regime change stuff. And I remember the Women Life Zionism and all of these like nobody, like all of these like little creators, like 20-year-old, nobody, like teenagers. Some of them were like, they would sit there with their face, that weird genre of TikTok video where you like look pensive and like pensive music is playing. It's like really thinking about her. And it's like, and then it cuts to some random Iranian who's like martyred. Like, this is a farce. This is a farce. You live in the country that does all the bad things to its own people every day, any time of day. At that time, someone is being tortured to death by your countrymen, and it doesn't bother you. But the algorithm, when you talk about Iran, does likes you a lot. So this is the ultimate farce of this. So Clarissa Ward was involved in all the ridiculous stuff in Syria. She's the one who went to that liberated prison in Syria and interviewed the guy who turned out was a former fucking Assad government guy. It wasn't even true, and he was like faking it, like and it was like the stupidest fucking farce. But here's the thing, guys, we keep thinking like, oh, no one buys this. People aren't supposed to buy it. They're not supposed to buy it now. It's just going out. It's just like they just are doing the same act that they've been doing the whole time, which is human rights trademark, human rights registered copyright. Like it's just they've kept this same scheme. And what's so fascinating is like, it's like, okay, what about Gaza? What about Gaza? Gaza doesn't count. So like they haven't adjusted the program that like lib imperialism has developed over the last, I don't know how many decades, the like regime change infrastructure of like, oh, we're worried about people X. Oh, we're worried about people Y. I hear there's a crisis. Oh, the people want the downfall of the regime. That like we saw in Syria unfold in years, right? Like that's what we saw in all of these countries. But that's the thing, like in Iran, you have a state that is far more able to deal with the real threats that these projects paper over. Okay, so when I say women life Zionism, am I shitting on some Iranian shit libs who aren't Zionists per se, who are angry about mandatory hijab? Yeah, okay. But the reason why I call it women life Zionism is because it was appropriated by Zionists openly, clearly, and pushed by them. And so when that happens to your movement, you're donezo. You've lost your credibility. So, but here's the thing. They are forcing all of their vassals to get in line and say, okay, pledge your allegiance to the blue and yellow. Okay? Like say that you're a loyal goy. Okay, we want you to say that. And so they have a bunch of these stupid, fucking idiotic Kurdish goons standing up. Again, all women standing up. We're like, okay, we're going to invade. What are you going to do? You and your 400 dudes, like driving down a highway, watched by an Iranian drone the whole time until you're fucking droned out of existence? Like that's the game you're playing when you do regime change, insurgency war. You're playing with a state. Like if we did this, guys, imagine if all of us lost our brains and we were like, fuck this, we're going to take up arms against the state. Like the East is a podcast extended universe militia gets together. We would last 10 minutes. Okay. They would drone us from like,
that's generous.
Like not even 10 minutes. Like if we took up arms in any, even if we glanced in a direction of the state with arms, we would die. And they tell you that. They laugh. So this idea that you can just like poof, make insurgency alive and bring it to life. That is like a joke. That's an imperialist dream. Did they do that in January 2026, right? This last month in Iran? Yes. But they burned a lot of assets doing it, and it didn't get them anywhere. It did not get them anywhere. It got Iran, like, what did it do? Did it, unless the only thing, if it worked, the only way I can see it working is that it sort of started the ball on this like atrocity propaganda that they kept going with, even though they don't really care at this point. They're just like, no, it's for Israel. It's fine. Like, we're just doing this for Israel. It's not a big deal. Like, they don't need the fig leaf of we're protecting helpless Iranians. Like, it's not a rescue. Like, the influencers are still saying this. The Zionists are still saying this, but like they themselves are like, no, we want greater Israel. So it's more important for them to use their proxies as a flex in public than to actually have their proxies perform as independent. Okay. And so that's the stage we're at. And that's why you have this, suddenly you're hearing about Kurds in the media when you didn't before. Like, the only time you hear about Kurdish people in our media is when they're being instrumentalized by the West. Okay. Otherwise they're not. Right? Like I mean, that's true in a lot of ways. It's true about Iranians. I mean, they're being instrumentalized when they're like, oh, you're a victim. But in Kurds, it's so naked with like Kurds and like Kurdish compradors. It's so naked. And of course, like and their big allies on our part of the world are anarchists. Okay. Straight up anarchist regime changers. I remember I was in Berlin in 2009. Okay. 2010. There were all these anarchist conferences where? In Diyarbakir. Diyarbakir is in the eastern, it's the largest Kurdish town in Turkey. It's on the eastern edge. It's on the eastern edge of Turkey. It's right on the border with Syria, I'm pretty sure. I have to like look this up. Like, these were conferences were being held. Like, there was a pipeline of people going from Turkey into Syria. Like there was a pipeline of people, not just, and these people were multiple different kinds of political affiliations. There were anarchists, there were jihadis, there were Kurds, there were all kinds of local fighters. Like this was a global war, and it was filtered. And one of the pillars of it was this left-wing feminist anarchist Rojava project, right? So it's not, this is like how they erect their regime change apparatus shouldn't concern us in a lot of ways anymore. I don't think it's worth our time to be like, okay, Rojava is the name that they give to Hasaka, which is a province in Syria. And it doesn't help us at this point to sit down and decode this now.
But we should say how they exploit actual issues, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
but that's
being fucked by all the Arabs for ages and then being exploited to become this is precisely what you're saying. The same thing about Iran, the same thing about Lebanon.
Yeah.
Whatever the case is, we need to be, clear on that.
But then in the midst of all this is that the leadership of these Kurdish groups have chosen many, many times to be on the side of imperialism. They still are, they still do. And to this day, they are loyally performing their task. I saw a protest for the PKK once in Toronto. I was like I was walking down the street. It was a bitterly cold day. And I was like just unemployed Sina, and just like hanging out. and then I was like, why are people honking? And then I was like, it's not, and it was like not a big, it was, and then I looked it up, like Protest Toronto, and it was like a car rally for Kurdistan or something. And then I was like, okay. And then I looked it up on my phone, and then the entire procession went by my face as I was looking at it was 8 fucking cars, and they were holding pictures of fucking Apo out of their cars and honking their horns for a couple of blocks. Like, that's not a protest. That's a performance of protest. That's someone who is paid or is part of some kind of project that is like material in origin to perform something for a wider audience, either to be recorded or just to do it in and of itself. But that's not something that's like protest. It's to give the impression that the thing that you support for imperialist reasons has some popular human support. But that in that moment was not real. That was astroturfing live. That's how they do it. So at this point, where you have all of the Kurdish groups who have already been sold out by the US and Syria, now you're talking about, oh, okay, these are different Kurds that we won't sell out this time in the different part of the world. Oh, okay. But realistically, what I think is going to happen is that that's the excuse. They say, oh, the CIA is Kurdish something. The CIA is spending in American special forces. Okay, that's what their way of saying. They're saying American special forces, and they're calling them like Kurdish militias. Right. But here's the thing. This is not going to work. I mean, they killed like 20 border guards the other day, Iranian border guards in Elam, which is on the western side, which is on the side with Iraq. So it's not like, this is not child's play. I'm not dismissing it. There's very serious consequences, but Iran is too big to be Syrianized. I swear. I mean, I'm saying that now. I'm saying that now, but I don't think the conditions are there for what they're doing. I think they're just going to, and there's also been stories that you don't hear about involving Kurds in the midst of all this, because I think like 4 nights, before his martyrdom, there was a massive attack on the leader's compound. Right. There was a massive attack, and it was repelled by Iranian state forces. And there was open street battles. They don't report this stuff here, but it was like a trial run to get to him because they wanted to do the Maduro thing of shepherd them out for the cameras. So at the end of the day, all this is for the fucking cameras. It's not actually about strategy. Right. They need their pathological need to flex will be their undoing. I promise you. And I think this is the Sinwar doctrine. Make your enemy so insane, so mouth-frothingly evil that they start consuming themselves and all of the resources around them until they exhaust themselves and they can't defend themselves. Then your allies come in and finish the job. And we might be at that point, guys, because the U.S. empire is not doing well in our region. It's hiding. Even Elizabeth Warren herself, the pretendian in chief, she herself came out of a classified fucking thing, and she was like, "Yeah, it's a lot worse than you think." Like the US is losing a lot. Like this killing Khamenei and launching whatever this is costing them a lot. It's I don't know. And I don't, the same way that doing the genocide, and like even I heard this on a friend of mine, Ali Alizadeh, said this, that even a butcher's hands gets tired after 700 days. And I think that this, as much as people say, oh, Iran waited too long, I think this was the plan the whole time. I don't think, like they say that the Gaza people didn't tell the wider axis. I mean, I just find that impossible to believe. I find that impossible, that there wasn't some kind of high level conversation about October 7th, or at least Iranians and their wider axis didn't find out about it. Like they really kept it secret from their allies. I don't buy it.
I mean, even if you didn't, at this point, that's no longer the case. But Jay, I think you have to go, right? Do you want to close this out?
We do have to wind down. I do want to say a couple of things. I mean, you said, Sina, when I sent this, and I think it's a good point that I mean, the question about this Clarissa Ward clip to me is less about the Kurdish forces, or it signals to me that really they have no prospects for any way to change regime within Iran right now that they can figure out. And they're also claiming they're not going to put US boots on the ground, right? And so they're trying to figure out what force they can get to go on the ground. And also, I think when a force does go on the ground, if that does come to pass, they want it to appear as if it belongs in the region in some way, right? But really what it'll be is a whole bunch of CIA and JSOC guys, probably with some ally with them, right? Or, as you said, some fig leaf, Sina. And I think that's important, because I don't know, there's no strategic value that I can see of publicizing this in this way and saying, oh yeah, the CIA has been arming them, and they're supported by the US and Israel, and they're still struggling to figure out, are we going to do it because it's tricky for us regionally, it might get us in trouble with some of our allies, etc. Like, why put all of that limited hangout, right, like out there, unless it's a psyop essentially, right, for when if some force does appear within Iran, that they can say, oh, these are regional, actors, or these are the Kurdish liberation within Iran, and so I think that's, to me, it signals scrambling in a lot of ways, that I think that they are right now. And just to connect back to the Jon Stewart piece, I know it's absurd and so ridiculous and racist, but it's also like, it's so fucking stupid, right? Because to go back to the question of precision, right? Like, Iran has targets that they are going after, and there are bases, there are embassies, right, which are bases, there are, like ports, which are like little naval ports, right? And there are
not just random people at a bar, like I'm just flailing.
Yeah, there are.
I wish they would hit the influencers.
I know for both of you, there are plenty of people that you wouldn't mind that they just took out, but they're not going after, civilian targets in this. That's
they're actually not
happening.
Even going after like the countries. They're saying that we're not attacking your countries. We're not. Right. Legally, we're attacking bases on your countries' lands that are American property. We're not kidding. However, I mean, you can take liberally, you can debate that liberally, because Americans leave their bases and then they go into hotels, and then that makes them a base. And so, what they say, I realized, I'm like, oh, they're doing the thing that Israelis claim to do, which is, oh no, this had terrorist infrastructure. So Iranians found the terrorist infrastructure, and then they attacked them. And the CIA isn't safe. I mean, the videos from Bahrain and stuff from Saudi are insane. Just like some apartment complex and like flying lawnmower. It's like 3 floors of it, 20 flights up. Like that's not that doesn't bespeak power to me. Like all of the US imperial strength can't stop a flying lawnmower hitting their precious CIA boys.
They've taken out 2 THAAD missile defense systems. Like, this has never happened. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars of US military infrastructure that's just being evaporated within days. And the missile defense, like, they don't have a way to refill the capacity of this stuff. They don't have enough production to do it if it keeps going the way that it is. And so, yeah, anyway, I just wanted to kind of close with some of those remarks because I think there are a lot of reasons not to get into a state of despair or hopelessness, and also to understand that all that shit you're seeing in mainstream media and from this administration and so on, like, don't look at it as a projection of power. Like, they do want to project that. They do want people to think you can't fuck with the United States and we can impose whatever we want. But that's just not, it's just not reality, and we shouldn't succumb to that kind of defeatism. So that's really what I wanted to say. But thank you, Sina and Lara. We'll have to do this again soon, and it's been great to connect with both of you these last couple of conversations and to be in touch with both of you. So, of course, as Adnan said, make sure that you are signed up for and your notifications and everything are on for The East is a Podcast and for Psychic Militancy. Psychic Militancy is the newest of our kind of our fleet of podcasts.
This Friday, actually, we're having a live stream with our comrades Jomar and Alex Avinia about Mexico and Cuba. So make sure you check that out at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, I was really, I'm still interested in hearing more about what happened, but like there is actually supposedly an oil tanker that's finally going to Cuba after like 5 months or something like that without it. So I'm hoping that is successful, and I'm curious to figure out the circumstances around that, but to the extent that we will. But yeah, and we did have a conversation, if people haven't checked it out, with Belly of the Beast in Cuba with Liz, and that was a really good discussion as well, hearing from somebody in Cuba, which you don't often do, on YouTube and within our spaces. So, and of course, check out the work that Belly of the Beasts. They've got a lot of great documentaries about Cuba. So, all right, thank you everybody
for bringing us together.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jay.
Bye.
Thank you.